It's a piece of the fabric of the history of our nation right here in the heart of Texas. From the shores of Galveston Island to the space of what was once the historic Osterman Building.
To these brick-paved streets right here in Houston's Freedmanstown, where families built homes, started businesses, and raised families. And they left a legacy that still stands here today.
This is the story of Juneteenth.
It was the final blow to slavery.
On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed into law the Emancipation Proclamation as the war between the North and South was being fought.
He says that on January the 1st, 1863, all slaves in bondage will be freed in those areas that are in rebellion against the United States.
But for slaves in Texas, the freedom bell had not yet rung. While the Civil War raged on for another 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, President Lincoln continued his work to abolish slavery everywhere.
It was very clear that if the Union wins the war, slavery is over.
Though Texas slaves were not free, news of the Emancipation Proclamation had already spread into the state.
Or the owner in a small plantation went into town, he brought the slaves with him to load the wagons or unload the goods. And they heard the news.
2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, on January 31st, 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed by the House of Representatives, constitutionally banning slavery in the United States. Months later, in the spring of 1865, the Civil War ended.
Then on June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger and Union soldiers arrived on the shores of Galveston Island. They issued General Order No. 3, freeing all slaves in the state of Texas.
At the end of the first sentence, it said all slaves are free, but at the beginning of the second sentence, it says this involves an absolute equality.
Sam Collins is a history buff.
So when you think about the words absolute and equality, you would think that equality would be enough. But he stamped it with absolute equality. We're still in pursuit of that absolute equality today.
The Galveston native loves sharing stories about his hometown, especially the story of Juneteenth. In his research, Sam learned about the United States colored troops who stood alongside Union troops when they arrived in Galveston to take over Texas and free the enslaved. Though freed by the order, the transition from slave to freed man or woman was not instant, and by some historical accounts, met with absolute opposition, as recalled here by a former slave.
The reaction on the plantations was mixed. It depended upon the owner and of the land and the slaves. Some were very harsh, basically said, "You're free, get out of here." The roads were crowded with slaves trying to go back to Louisiana or wherever they had come from to find the relatives they were separated from.
Some of them took the road from Galveston and settled right here in Houston.